My name is Wanda, and at 61, I've lived long enough to know when to speak and when to stay silent. When my son Andrew married Natalie last spring, I kept quiet about the $52 million I inherited from my late husband, Robert. I'd sensed something off about my new daughter-in-law, but couldn't put my finger on it. I chose to wait and watch instead of interfere. Thank goodness I did, because days later, his wife showed up with something I never expected. Before I dive into this wild story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever had to protect your family from someone with ulterior motives, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Trust me, this story will show you why sometimes silence is the best wealth protection strategy a mother can have. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where everyone knew each other's business. My parents worked hard their whole lives, my father as a factory worker and my mother as a school secretary. They taught me the value of every dollar earned. I was never the prettiest girl in school, but I was certainly among the smartest. That's probably what caught Robert's eye when we met in college. Robert was studying computer science when that field was just emerging. He had thick glasses and a brilliant mind that could see possibilities others couldn't. We started dating in our sophomore year, and by graduation, we were married. Our early years together were lean. We rented a tiny apartment near the university where Robert pursued his master's degree while I worked as an administrative assistant at an insurance company. One day, Wanda, he'd tell me as we ate macaroni and cheese for the third time that week, all this struggle will pay off. I promise you that. I believed him, but I never imagined how right he would be. In the late 1980s, Robert started making small investments in emerging tech companies. He had an uncanny ability to spot potential where others saw only risk. By the mid-1990s, his first major investment paid off when a startup he'd put $10,000 into was acquired by Microsoft. Suddenly, we had enough money to buy our first real home in Connecticut and start thinking about a family. Andrew came along in 1995, the greatest gift of our lives. As our financial situation improved dramatically through the tech boom, Robert and I made a conscious decision. We wanted Andrew to grow up understanding the value of work and self-reliance just as we had. Despite our growing wealth, we lived modestly in a nice but not ostentatious home. Andrew attended public school, wore regular clothes, and got an allowance tied to chores just like his friends. I don't want to raise a trust fund kid with no understanding of how the real world works, Robert would say. The greatest gift we can give our son is the ability to make his own way. When Andrew wanted his first car, at 16, Robert made him work summer jobs to pay for half of a used Toyota. When college applications came around, we agreed to pay his tuition, but expected him to handle his living expenses through part-time work. Sometimes, Andrew would complain, especially when he saw friends getting everything handed to them. Dad Tyler's parents just bought him a brand new BMW for his birthday. "Why do I have to drive this old beater?" he'd protest. Robert would smile patiently and say, "Tyler's parents are doing what they think is right. I'm doing what I know is right. Someday, you'll understand the difference." For the most part, Andrew grew into a fine young man. He had Robert's intelligence and my practicality, though occasionally I noticed flashes of entitlement that concerned me. After graduating from college with a business degree, he got a job at a marketing firm in the city. Robert and I were so proud watching him navigate early adulthood, making his own decisions, and learning from his own mistakes. Then, 3 years ago, our world shattered. Robert had been experiencing unusual fatigue for months, but brushed it off as stress from work. When he finally agreed to see a doctor, the diagnosis was devastating: advanced pancreatic cancer. Within 6 months, the love of my life was gone. In my grief, I discovered something shocking. While I knew we were financially comfortable, I had no idea of the true extent of Robert's success. His investments, retirement accounts, life insurance, and business holdings totaled just over $52 million. All of it passed to me as his sole beneficiary. The attorney handling Robert's estate explained everything while I sat there numb with grief and shock. "Mrs. Peterson, your husband was extremely shrewd with his investments. You'll never have to worry about money again." Among Robert's personal effects was a sealed letter addressed to me. Inside, he'd written his wishes for our son's future. "My darling Wanda, if you're reading this, I've left you too soon. I'm sorry for that. You'll find that I've left everything to you, not Andrew. This was a deliberate choice. I want our son to build his own success, to know the satisfaction of creating his own legacy. Help him when he truly needs it, but let him find his way. In time, you'll know when and how to share our wealth with him. Trust your instincts, as I have always trusted them. All my love, Robert." I took his words to heart. After settling the estate, I maintained our modest lifestyle. I stayed in our family home, kept the same friends, and continued volunteer work at the local library. Only my financial advisor knew the full extent of my wealth. I decided to wait until Andrew had established himself professionally before discussing any inheritance. Robert would have wanted it that way. What I couldn't possibly have known was how critically important that decision would prove to be. Andrew met Natalie Jackson at his marketing firm about a year after his father passed away. She'd just been hired as an account executive, transferred from their Chicago office. The first time I met her was at a casual dinner Andrew arranged at his apartment. "Mom, this is Natalie," he said, his face glowing with the unmistakable light of new love. "Natalie, this is my mom, Wanda." Natalie was stunning in that polished, metropolitan way that makes you immediately aware of your own flaws. Perfectly highlighted blonde hair, immaculate makeup, designer clothes that somehow looked effortlessly stylish. She greeted me with a warm hug and perfect white smile. "Andrew has told me so much about you, Wanda. I'm so happy to finally meet you," she gushed. Throughout dinner, Natalie was charming and attentive. She asked thoughtful questions about my volunteer work and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. When the conversation turned to Andrew's childhood, she laughed at all the right moments and touched his arm affectionately. She was by all appearances delightful, yet something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Perhaps it was the way her eyes calculated everything in the room, or how her questions occasionally probed into family matters a bit too directly. "So did Mr. Peterson leave Andrew anything special to remember him by family heirlooms, or anything like that?" she asked, casually, while helping me clear the dinner plates. "Robert wasn't much for material possessions," I answered truthfully. "His legacy was more about values and memories." "That's sweet," she said, though I noticed a flicker of something in her expression. Disappointment. But surely there must have been something valuable. Watches, investments. Andrew mentioned his father was quite business savvy. I redirected the conversation, but filed away this interaction in my mind. Over the next few months, Andrew and Natalie's relationship intensified rapidly. He was clearly infatuated. Every conversation we had circled back to how amazing Natalie was, how she'd transformed his life, how he'd never met anyone like her. "She's from this really well-connected family in Chicago, Mom," he told me proudly. "Her father's in finance, and her mother runs charity galas. You should see their vacation photos from St. Bart's and the Amalfi Coast." What Andrew didn't seem to notice, but I couldn't help observing, was Natalie's extravagant taste, despite her supposedly modest income. Each time I saw her, she sported new designer handbags, expensive jewelry, or luxury brand clothing. When I gently inquired about her shopping habits, Andrew laughed it off. "She's got great connections in retail from her clients at work. Amazing discounts, sample sales, that kind of thing," he explained. 6 months into their relationship, Andrew called me, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom," she said, "yes, we're engaged." My heart sank, even as I congratulated him. It felt too soon, too rushed. But what could I say? Andrew was 30, certainly old enough to make this decision. And perhaps my reservations were just the natural caution of a mother not wanting any woman to be quite good enough for her son. The engagement party was held at an upscale restaurant in the city, paid for by Natalie's parents, the Jacksons. They were an attractive, sociable couple who clearly knew how to navigate elite social settings. During the evening, I overheard a conversation between Mr. Jackson and another guest that gave me pause. "Beautiful event," the guest was saying. "You must be very proud." "Absolutely," Mr. Jackson replied. "Though between the college tuitions, this party, and the upcoming wedding, I'll be working until I'm 90. He laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Thank God, Natalie's finally marrying into a family with solid financial footing. Lord knows we could use a break." I pretended not to hear, but the comment lodged in my mind like a splinter. That night, as Andrew drove me home, I tried to gently broach the subject of finances. "Andrew, honey, have you and Natalie discussed a prenuptial agreement? It's a standard protection these days, especially since you're both working professionals." His face immediately darkened. "Mom, that's not very romantic. Natalie and I trust each other completely. We don't need legal documents to prove that." "I'm just thinking of your father. He always believed in being practical about financial matters." "Dad's not here," Andrew said sharply, then immediately looked regretful. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean that. It's just that Natalie and I are building our own life together. Times are different now." I let the subject drop, but my unease continued to grow. The wedding planning quickly spiraled into something far more elaborate than I had anticipated. Natalie had visions of a society event that would have made British royalty blush complete, with a historic castle venue, custom designer gown, exotic flower arrangements flown in from South America, and a guest list approaching 300 people. When Andrew sheepishly approached me about contributing to the wedding costs, I agreed to provide $20,000, a generous amount that I thought reasonable. Natalie's reaction was less than gracious. "That's so thoughtful, Wanda," she said, with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But the venue deposit alone is $30,000. Perhaps you could reconsider. After all, this is your only son's wedding." "I'm sorry, but that's what I'm comfortable contributing." I held firm. "I'm sure you and Andrew can plan something beautiful that fits your combined budgets." Later that evening, Andrew called, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom, Natalie's pretty upset. She says most mothers of the groom contribute much more, especially when they're in a position to do so." "What does she mean by in a position to do so?" I asked carefully. "Well, with Dad's life insurance and the house being paid off, she just thought you might have more flexibility." It was the first indication that Natalie had been calculating my financial situation. I wondered what else Andrew had shared with her. Andrew, $20,000 is my limit. Your father and I always believed in living within our means, and that's a value I hope you'll continue to embrace. The conversation ended awkwardly, and I noticed a growing distance between us as wedding preparations continued. Natalie took charge of everything, often scheduling vendor meetings when I couldn't attend due to my volunteer commitments. When I did participate, I noticed her demeanor change dramatically, depending on whether Andrew was present. With him, she was sweet, deferential, soliciting my opinion. Without him, she was curt, dismissive, sometimes barely acknowledging my presence. One afternoon, I arrived early for a meeting with the florist. As I waited in the shop's consultation area, I overheard Natalie speaking with the owner in an adjacent room. The arrangements need to be spectacular, truly over the top, she was saying. Price isn't a concern. That's quite a budget increase from what we initially discussed, the florist replied. Are you sure it's feasible? Natalie laughed lightly. Let's just say there's family money that will be coming our way very soon. My future mother-in-law is sitting on a fortune she doesn't even use. Once we're officially family, things will change. Andrew is her only child, after all. I sat, frozen stunned, by her brazen assumption. What had Andrew told her about our family finances? And what made her so confident she would have access to money that wasn't even his to give that evening? I called Andrew and suggested we meet for lunch, just the two of us. Over sandwiches at his favorite deli, I tried to approach the subject delicately. Honey, I'm a bit concerned about the escalating wedding costs. I hope you and Natalie aren't taking on debt for this one day. Andrew shifted uncomfortably. It's under control, Mom. Natalie has great taste, and she deserves her dream wedding. Dad would have wanted me to do this right. Your father would have wanted you to be financially responsible, I countered gently. There's nothing wrong with a beautiful wedding, but not at the expense of your financial security. Is this about the money I asked you for? Andrew's tone grew defensive. Because if $20,000 is really all you can afford, I understand. Natalie and I will figure it out. The implication that I was being stingy rather than prudent stung deeply. I realized Andrew truly believed I was holding back out of miserliness rather than principle. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed with a text. His expression changed immediately. It's Natalie. There's an issue with the caterer. I need to go. He stood dropping cash for his half of the lunch. Mom, I love you, but sometimes you can be really old-fashioned about money. The world doesn't work the way it did in your and Dad's day. Sometimes you have to spend money to get what you want. As he rushed out, I sat there feeling a growing distance between us that had never existed before. Later that week, Natalie called me directly, something she rarely did. Wanda, I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but I wanted to clear the air, she began, her voice honey sweet. I think there's been a misunderstanding about the wedding budget. I'm listening, I said neutrally. Andrew is absolutely devastated that you seem unwilling to help make our special day everything it could be. He would never say this to you, but he feels like his father would have been more generous. The manipulation was so transparent, it almost took my breath away. Natalie, I knew Robert better than anyone. He believed in living within one's means and not starting a marriage buried in debt. Well, her voice took on an edge. We just find it interesting that you're suddenly so concerned about money when everyone knows Robert left quite a comfortable situation. Andrew is his only child after all. It seems strange to be so tight-fisted about what will eventually be his anyway. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that engaging would only escalate the situation. I've stated what I'm comfortable contributing, Natalie. I hope you and Andrew can plan a lovely wedding that you can afford." There was a long pause. Before she responded, her voice now trembling. "I see. Well, I should go. I need to comfort Andrew. He'll be so hurt to know his mother cares more about her bank account than his happiness." After that conversation, I made the painful decision to step back from wedding planning. I would attend appointments if specifically asked, provide the promised funds, and otherwise support from a distance. It broke my heart to feel so alienated from this important milestone in my son's life. But Natalie had created a situation where my presence only generated tension. What worried me most wasn't the money itself, but what Natalie's focus on it revealed about her character and how it was already affecting my relationship with Andrew. I wondered if I should tell him about his father's inheritance plans, but remembered Robert's letter. This was a test Andrew needed to pass on his own. Interfering now might only push him further away, straight into Natalie's waiting arms. So I watched silently as the wedding juggernaut rolled forward, driven by Natalie's ambition and Andrew's desire to please her. And I prayed that my son would eventually see what I could already clearly perceive. The wedding day arrived with perfect May weather sunshine spilling across the historic castle grounds, where Andrew and Natalie would exchange vows. Despite my concerns about the cost, I couldn't deny the venue was breathtaking. Stone walls draped with white roses and trailing greenery, crystal chandeliers, suspended from ancient wooden beams, a string quartet playing softly as 280 guests found their seats. I wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress and pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. As mother of the groom, I was escorted to my front row seat by a groomsman. Andrew looked handsome and nervous in his tuxedo, giving me a quick, tight hug before taking his position at the altar. When Natalie appeared at the end of the aisle, there was an audible gasp from the guests. Her gown was a masterpiece of beading and lace that must have cost as much as a small car. Her father, looking both proud and slightly strained, escorted her past the rows of admirers. The ceremony was beautiful, if overly elaborate. I blinked back tears, watching Andrew recite his vows, remembering the little boy who'd once declared he would never get married because girls are yucky. Now, here he was, a man grown, pledging his life to this woman who shone like a diamond. I only hoped she wasn't just as hard and calculating as one. At the reception, I was seated at the head table, though noticeably at the far end from the bride and groom. The 5-course dinner featured delicacies flown in from around the world. The wine flowed freely from bottles I recognized as costing hundreds of dollars each. The towering cake was a work of art, decorated with edible gold leaf. Every detail screamed expense, and I couldn't help calculating the mounting debt this single day was creating. Between dinner courses, I excused myself to find the ladies' room. As I passed a small anteroom, I overheard Natalie's parents speaking in hushed but intense tones. "Did you see the Martinez family? Victor practically runs Wall Street these days," Mrs. Jackson was saying. "Having them here gives Natalie such important connections." "Connections won't pay off the second mortgage we took for this circus," Mr. Jackson replied tensely. "We're counting on Andrew's situation changing soon. You know that, right?" "Natalie has it under control," her mother assured him. "She always lands on her feet. And from what she's told me, that old woman is sitting on a fortune that Andrew doesn't even know about. Once Natalie works her magic, they'll be set, and so will we." I slipped away before they noticed me, my heart pounding. The brazenness of their gold-digging scheme was worse than I'd feared. Not only was Natalie after money she thought existed, but her entire family was in on the plan. Later during the gift opening, I watched Natalie's face carefully. For each wrapped package, containing typical wedding gifts, her smile grew progressively tighter. She was clearly expecting substantial checks. When she opened my gift, an antique silver frame containing a restored photo of Robert holding newborn Andrew, accompanied by a check for $1,000 as a special wedding gift, beyond my contribution to the costs, she barely managed to maintain her pleasant facade. "How sentimental," she said quickly, setting the frame aside and moving to the next gift. Andrew and Natalie departed for a 2-week honeymoon in the Maldives, staying in an overwater bungalow at a resort I knew charged at least $3,000 per night. As guests tossed rose petals at their departure, I hugged my son tightly. "I love you, Andrew. Be happy," I whispered. "Thanks, Mom. We'll see you when we get back," he replied, already turning toward the waiting car, where Natalie beckoned impatiently. The day after the wedding, I met with my financial advisor, Marcus, who had been Robert's trusted consultant for decades. "Everything remains secure, Mrs. Peterson," he assured me, reviewing my accounts. "We've made no changes to the inheritance structure. Andrew still has no access to the principal funds, as per Mr. Peterson's instructions. And there's been no inquiries, no attempts to get information about the accounts," I asked. Marcus hesitated. "Actually, I did receive a call last week from someone claiming to be Andrew's fiancée. She said she was helping organize your family's estate planning for after the wedding." I explained that I could only discuss accounts with authorized individuals. "Thank you for your discretion," I said, feeling simultaneously relieved and troubled. While Andrew and Natalie were honeymooning, I received several calls from vendors demanding payment for wedding services. Apparently, final balances for everything from the photographer to the lighting design remained unpaid, despite Natalie's assurances to each that payment would be processed right after the wedding. The combined unpaid balance approached $70,000. I visited Andrew's apartment to water his plants as promised and noticed a stack of mail on his desk. I wasn't snooping intentionally, but a credit card statement lay open, revealing a balance of over $40,000. Next to it was another statement from a different card showing $30,000 in new charges. My stomach knotted with worry. Most disturbing was a call I received from James Andrews' college roommate, and still one of his closest friends. "Mrs. Peterson, I hope you don't mind me calling. I'm worried about Andrew," he said hesitantly. "What is it, James? Is he okay?" "He's fine physically, but I'm concerned about his financial situation." At the bachelor party, Natalie kept calling and texting him about wedding expenses. When the guys teased him about it, he laughed it off, saying they were temporarily stretching things, but would be coming into serious money soon. When I asked him what he meant, he just winked and said something about family resources being redistributed. The implications were clear. Natalie had convinced Andrew that he would soon have access to wealth he didn't even know existed. She was spending against an inheritance that wasn't guaranteed and certainly wasn't imminent. My concern deepening, I made a difficult decision. I hired a private investigator to look into Natalie's background. What he uncovered was alarming. Before moving to our city, Natalie had been engaged twice, before both times, to wealthy men from prominent families. Both engagements had ended abruptly and under mysterious circumstances. There were also multiple maxed-out credit cards, a history of living well beyond her means, and several small claims. court judgments against her for unpaid debts that had been settled just before she met Andrew. The investigator's report confirmed my worst fears. Natalie was a calculated gold digger who had targeted my son as her next prospective meal ticket. And now she was legally bound to him as his wife. Andrew and Natalie returned from their honeymoon, tanned and seemingly happy. They'd rented a luxury apartment in an expensive downtown building, though I couldn't imagine how they were affording the rent, given their salaries. When I visited for their first dinner party as a married couple, I noticed the place was furnished with high-end pieces that had to have cost a small fortune. "Do you like it, Mom?" Andrew asked proudly, gesturing around the professionally decorated space. "Natalie has amazing taste." "It's lovely," I said truthfully. "Did you get a great deal on the furniture?" Natalie answered before Andrew could. "We decided to invest in quality pieces that will last. No sense pinching pennies on things we use every day, right? Besides, we're due for some positive changes in our financial situation soon." The meaningful look she gave me made her implication crystal clear. As we sat down to dinner, Natalie clinked her glass. "Before we eat, I thought this would be a perfect time to discuss something important." She smiled brightly at me. "Family finances." Andrew looked surprised. "Honey, maybe this isn't the best topic for dinner." "Nonsense." Natalie reached for his hand. "We're family now. There shouldn't be secrets between us, especially important ones." I took a sip of water, maintaining my composure. "What did you want to discuss specifically, Natalie?" "Well," she leaned forward eagerly. "Now that Andrew and I are married, I think it's time we had a comprehensive understanding of the family's financial position. Assets, investments, life insurance policies, that sort of thing, for proper planning purposes." "My financial situation is quite straightforward," I replied calmly. "I have my home, my retirement account, and some modest investments that provide me with enough to live comfortably." Natalie's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "That's wonderful, but I think we all know there's more to the story. Robert was very successful in business. Surely he left behind more than just modest investments." Andrew shifted uncomfortably. "Natalie, I told you Dad was private about money matters. Whatever he left, Mom is hers to manage." "But darling," she turned to him with wide eyes, "you're his only child. Everything he built was meant to secure your future too. Our future." She looked back at me. "Wanda, don't you think Robert would want to see his son benefit from his hard work? Especially now that he's starting a family of his own?" The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost laughable. If I hadn't been so concerned about Andrew, I might have admired her boldness. "Robert believed strongly in self-reliance," I said carefully. "He wanted Andrew to build his own success, just as he did. I'm respecting his wishes." "So there is substantial money." Natalie pounced on my implied confirmation. "I knew it, Andrew. Your mother has been sitting on a fortune while we stretched ourselves to the limit for the wedding." "That's not what I said," I clarified. "And I contributed what I felt was appropriate to the wedding." $20,000, Natalie scoffed. "A pittance compared to what you're hiding." Andrew looked back and forth between us, clearly confused and distressed. "Can we please change the subject? This isn't how I wanted our first dinner together to go." Natalie immediately softened, touching his arm. "Of course, baby. I'm sorry. I just get frustrated when I see you working so hard, when there could be resources to help us get ahead." She shot me a pointed look before turning back to her plate. "We can discuss this another time." The rest of the evening passed in strained conversation about safer topics, but the damage was done. Andrew barely met my eyes as he walked me to my car afterward. "Mom, I'm sorry about that, he said quietly. Natalie's just stressed about our finances. The wedding and honeymoon were expensive. And now the apartment. Andrew, I placed my hand on his arm. Are you in financial trouble? Because if you need help, I can assist with a reasonable plan. But I'm concerned about the spending patterns I'm seeing. We're fine, he said quickly. Just finding our footing as a married couple. Natalie has big dreams for us, and sometimes I think she gets ahead of herself. Dreams are wonderful, but they should be built on solid ground, I told him. Your father and I started with almost nothing and worked our way up step by step. I know, Mom, and I appreciate that. He hugged me briefly. Don't worry about us. We'll figure it out. But the following week brought a barrage of texts and calls from Natalie, each more pointed than the last. Andrew and I are considering investment opportunities and need to understand our full financial picture. Family money is meant to support the next generation. Why are you hoarding what should be helping your son? Do you realize Andrew has student loans while you're sitting on millions? What kind of mother does that? I didn't respond to these provocations, which only seemed to inflame her further. Then, on Thursday afternoon, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened the door, Natalie stood there alone. Her usual polished appearance, slightly disheveled, her expression intense. We need to talk, Wanda. Woman to woman, she pushed past me into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. Natalie, this isn't a good time, I began, but she cut me off. When will it be a good time? When Andrew and I are drowning in debt. When we have to cancel our plans for a family because we can't afford it. When exactly were you planning to stop being selfish with money you don't even need? The mask had slipped completely. Gone was the sweet, deferential daughter-in-law. In her place stood an angry, entitled woman who viewed me as nothing but an obstacle to wealth. I think you should leave, I said firmly. Any discussions about finances should include Andrew. Andrew is too blinded by loyalty to ask for what's rightfully his, she snapped. Someone needs to advocate for him. Do you know, we have over $100,000 in credit card debt from the wedding, a wedding you barely contributed to, despite having millions stashed away. I maintained my composure with effort. The financial choices you and Andrew made for your wedding were yours alone. I was clear about what I could contribute. Could or would, she laughed bitterly. Let's stop pretending. I know about the inheritance. 50 million at least, according to what I've been able to piece together. Robert sold his company for a fortune before he died. Andrew should have access to that money now. He's 30 years old, for God's sake. Her information was surprisingly accurate, which meant she'd been investigating thoroughly. I wondered who her sources were and what else she might know. Natalie, my financial arrangements are private. But I will say this, Robert and I always agreed on how we wanted Andrew to make his way in the world. Those values haven't changed. Values, she spat the word. You mean outdated, cruel restrictions designed to control him? Well, I won't let you control us. Either you start being generous with what will eventually be Andrew's anyway, or I'll make sure he sees you for who you really are, a greedy old woman who doesn't care about her son's happiness. I took a deep breath, maintaining my calm. Is that an ultimatum, Natalie? Her face hardened. Call it whatever you want. But know this, I've taken out loans against our expected inheritance. Significant loans. If that money doesn't materialize soon, Andrew and I will be in serious trouble. Think about that while you're counting your millions. With that bombshell, she turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood frozen in my foyer, trying to process what had just happened. Natalie had taken out loans against an inheritance she had no legal right to, that Andrew didn't even know existed in full. The situation had escalated from concerning to potentially disastrous. I needed to protect my son, even if it meant finally revealing the truth I'd been keeping. 3 days after Natalie's confrontational visit, my quiet morning coffee was interrupted by insistent knocking at my front door. When I opened it, I found Natalie standing there. But this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a severe-looking man in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Behind them, Andrew was getting out of their car, his expression a mixture of confusion and distress. "Mrs. Peterson," the man extended his hand professionally. "I'm Gregory Walsh, attorney at law. I represent your son and daughter-in-law in a family financial matter. May we come in?" Stunned, I stepped aside as they entered my home. Andrew approached me last, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Mom, I'm sorry about this. I told Natalie we should just talk to you normally, but she insisted we needed legal representation." We gathered awkwardly in my living room, the lawyer taking a seat without invitation and opening his briefcase on my coffee table. "Mrs. Peterson," Walsh began, "I've been retained to help resolve a dispute regarding family assets. It's come to our attention that you're in possession of substantial wealth, approximately $52 million inherited from your late husband, Robert Peterson. Is this correct?" I stared at him, then at Andrew, whose shocked expression confirmed he was hearing this specific amount for the first time. "Mom," he whispered, "52 million. Is that true?" Before I could answer, Natalie jumped in. "Of course it's true. Your father was a tech genius who sold his company for a fortune. She's been hiding it from you all this time while we struggle." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Peterson, we've prepared these documents." He slid a thick folder toward me. "Essentially, they acknowledge Andrew's right to his inheritance now, rather than at some unspecified future date. We're requesting an immediate distribution of half the estate, $26 million, to your son as his rightful inheritance." I didn't touch the folder. "On what legal basis are you making this claim?" Walsh shifted uncomfortably. "While the estate was left to you, there's a moral obligation to honor your late husband's intentions to provide for his son. Additionally," he glanced at Natalie, who nodded encouragingly, "we have reason to believe there may be tax irregularities in the estate transfer that could warrant further investigation." It was a thinly veiled threat and completely baseless. Robert's estate planning had been meticulous, with every tax obligation properly fulfilled. "Mom, do you really have $52 million? Andrew asked again, his voice strained. I looked at my son, seeing the confusion and hurt in his eyes. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than I'd anticipated, and in the worst possible way. But perhaps it was also an opportunity for clarity. "Yes, Andrew. Your father left me approximately that amount when he died. And you never told me," his voice cracked. "All this time, when Natalie and I have been stressing about money, taking out loans for the wedding, maxing out credit cards." "Andrew," I said gently, "may I speak with you alone, without your lawyer and without Natalie?" "Absolutely not," Natalie interjected. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of all of us." Andrew hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "No, I want to hear what my mother has to say. Alone." He turned to Natalie and Mr. Walsh. "Please wait in the car. This is between me and my mom." Natalie's face contorted with anger. "Andrew, you can't be serious. She's manipulating you again." "Natalie, please," he said firmly. Just give us a few minutes. Seething Natalie grabbed her purse and stalked out the lawyer, following awkwardly behind her. When the front door closed, Andrew turned to me, his expression a mixture of hurt and anger. Explain this to me, Mom. Why would you keep this a secret? Do you have any idea the financial stress I've been under? I moved to my desk and retrieved Robert's letter in a file folder. Before I explain, I need you to read something. This is a letter your father left for me. And this, I handed him the folder, is what I learned about Natalie. Andrew read his father's letter slowly, his expression softening as he absorbed Robert's words. Then, with visible reluctance, he opened the folder containing the private investigator's report. As he flipped through the pages, documenting Natalie's previous engagements to wealthy men, her history of financial deception, and the multiple debts she'd accumulated and abandoned, the color drained from his face. This can't be right, he whispered. She wouldn't. She loves me. I believe she saw you as a path to wealth, I said gently. Based on what your father had achieved, it was a reasonable assumption that you might be quite wealthy or stand to inherit significant money. But I told her we lived modestly, that Dad believed in earning your own way, which may be why she became so focused on uncovering hidden family money, I suggested. Andrew, I need to ask you something important. Those loans Natalie mentioned, taking out against an expected inheritance, did you co-sign for them? He looked up, confusion crossing his features. What loans? I didn't sign anything like that. Before I could respond, the front door burst open. Natalie stormed back in her face, a mask of fury. Clearly, she'd been listening at the door. What lies are you telling him? She demanded. Andrew, don't believe any of this. She's trying to turn you against me because she doesn't want to share her precious money. Andrew stood up slowly, the file folder clutched in his hand. Did you take out loans against an inheritance you thought I was getting? Natalie faltered momentarily before recovering. I was being proactive about our future. These opportunities required immediate capital, and I knew the money would be there once your mother stopped being so selfish. Opportunities. Andrew's voice hardened. What opportunities, Natalie? Because according to this, he held up the file, you have a history of attaching yourself to wealthy men, accumulating debt, and then moving on. What is that? She lunged for the folder, but Andrew pulled it away. Whatever she's shown you is lies. You know me, Andrew. We love each other. Do we? His voice was quiet, but firm. Or did you love what you thought I could provide for you? Because I'm starting to wonder if I ever knew you at all. This is ridiculous. Natalie's voice rose shrilly. Your mother has manipulated this whole situation. She's been hoarding millions while watching us struggle. What kind of mother does that? A mother who respects her husband's wishes, I interjected calmly, and who wanted her son to know he was loved for himself, not for his potential inheritance. Tell me about the other men, Natalie, Andrew said, his voice hollow. The 2 previous engagements that mysteriously ended when their families apparently figured out your true intentions. Natalie's strategy shifted instantly. Her anger dissolved into tears as she rushed to Andrew, clutching his arm. Baby, those were mistakes, terrible misunderstandings. I was young and naive. What we have is real, you know that. But Andrew gently disentangled himself from her grasp. I think I need some time to process all this, and I think you should go. Go, I'm your wife. Natalie's tears vanished as quickly as they'd appeared. And I'm not leaving without what we came for. You deserve that money, Andrew. We deserve it. Please leave, Natalie, he repeated firmly. Mr. Walsh is still waiting in the car. Tell him his services won't be needed after all. Something in Natalie seemed to snap. Her beautiful face contorted with rage as she looked between Andrew and me. You'll regret this, she hissed. Both of you. I've invested too much to walk away with nothing. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture fell from the wall and shattered. In the silence that followed, Andrew sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. "I've been such a fool," he whispered. I sat beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You fell in love, Andrew. There's no shame in that." "It wasn't love, Mom. Not really. I was infatuated with the idea of her with the lifestyle she represented. And all the while, she was just using me to get to money I didn't even know existed." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Why didn't you tell me about the inheritance?" "Your father was very clear about his wishes," I explained. "He wanted you to establish yourself independently, to know the satisfaction of building your own success. He believed, and I agreed, that knowing about such a large inheritance too soon might derail your personal growth." Andrew nodded slowly. Dad always played the long game. He managed a small, sad smile. And I guess he was right. Look how quickly I lost my way when Natalie started painting pictures of easy money and luxury. "You haven't lost your way," I assured him. "You've just taken a detour, and now you're finding your path again." We spent the next few hours talking more openly than we had in years. I explained the full extent of Robert's estate planning, including the structures he'd put in place to ensure Andrew would eventually inherit everything, but only after meeting certain milestones that demonstrated financial responsibility. And I shared my growing concerns about Natalie's influence and the painful decision to investigate her background. By the time Andrew left that evening, we had a plan. He would stay with his friend James temporarily while sorting out his next steps with Natalie, and I would contact my attorney to discuss protecting both Andrew and the estate from whatever retaliatory measures Natalie might attempt. As I hugged him goodbye at the door, Andrew held on a little longer than usual. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything, for the things I said, for doubting you and Dad." "You have nothing to apologize for," I told him. "But now you understand why I stayed silent about the inheritance when you got married." He nodded soberly. "Thank goodness you did, because if Natalie had known for certain, she would have found a way to access it," I finished. "And that would have been a far more expensive lesson for all of us." The aftermath of that confrontation unfolded faster than I could have anticipated. Within 48 hours, Andrew had filed for legal separation, the first step toward divorce. Natalie, realizing her golden ticket was slipping away, unleashed a campaign of emotional and financial warfare that tested all of us. First came the tearful phone calls and texts to Andrew, pleading for forgiveness and reconciliation. When those went unanswered, she shifted to threats, alternately promising to ruin his reputation at work or to take every penny he had in a divorce settlement. She even showed up at his office, creating such a scene that security had to escort her from the building. "I still love her in some way," Andrew confessed during a quiet dinner at my house a week after their separation. "Or maybe I love who I thought she was. Is that crazy?" "Not crazy at all," I assured him. "The heart doesn't turn off its feelings like a faucet, even when the mind knows better." Meanwhile, my attorney discovered the true extent of Natalie's financial schemes. She had indeed taken out several high-interest loans against Andrew's anticipated inheritance, forging his signature on at least 2 documents. She had also opened joint credit accounts without his knowledge and maxed them out, purchasing luxury items that had mysteriously disappeared from their apartment. Most concerning was her attempt to access my accounts directly. Marcus, my financial advisor, reported that someone claiming to be acting on Andrew's behalf had tried to initiate transfers from my investment accounts, using personal information that could only have come from Andrew's private documents. We need to act quickly to protect both of you, my attorney advised during an emergency meeting. Fortunately, Mr. Peterson had the foresight to implement a strong prenuptial agreement. What prenuptial agreement? Andrew asked, confused. We didn't have one. Natalie refused to even discuss it. The attorney looked surprised. Then, understanding dawned. Ah, I see. Mrs. Peterson, would you care to explain? I took Andrew's hand. Your father and I always anticipated that his success might eventually complicate your relationships. When you were 25, we established a trust with specific conditions. One provision was that any marriage you entered without a prenuptial agreement would automatically trigger special protections, preventing your spouse from claiming any portion of your inheritance. It was our way of ensuring you wouldn't be targeted for the family money. So there was a prenup in effect, even though I didn't sign one? Andrew asked incredulously. Not exactly, but the trust structure effectively created similar protections. It's complex legal territory, but essentially, Natalie has no claim on your future inheritance because of how your father set things up. The divorce proceedings moved forward with surprising speed, largely because once Natalie's attorneys reviewed the ironclad trust documents, they advised her to settle quickly rather than drag out a losing battle. In the end, Andrew walked away with significant debt, but his future financial security intact. Natalie received only what the law mandated from their brief marriage, a fraction of what she had schemed to obtain. The emotional recovery took longer. Andrew began seeing a therapist to process the betrayal and to understand his own vulnerability to Natalie's manipulation. He moved into a modest apartment, sold most of the lavish furnishings from their marital home, and focused on rebuilding his career, which had suffered during the tumultuous months of their relationship. 6 months after the separation, Andrew came to me with a business plan. He wanted to start his own digital marketing consultancy, focusing on small businesses that couldn't afford the large agencies he'd previously worked for. I need a small loan to get started, Mom, he explained, spreading his carefully prepared financial projections across my dining table. Just enough for basic equipment and to cover expenses while I build a client base. I've calculated I can repay it within 18 months based on conservative growth estimates. I reviewed his materials, impressed by the thoroughness and realistic projections. This was the responsible, thoughtful son Robert and I had raised, re-emerging after the Natalie whirlwind. I'd be happy to provide a loan, I told him, but I'd like to structure it formally with proper terms and interest, just as any investor would. Andrew grinned, looking more like himself than he had in over a year. I'd expect nothing less. Dad would approve. With a modest $50,000 loan, Andrew launched Peterson Digital Strategies. True to his word, he repaid the loan in full within 16 months ahead of schedule. His business grew steadily, built on hard work, excellent service, and the integrity that had been his father's hallmark. Meanwhile, I worked with my financial and legal team to restructure Robert's estate. I created a foundation in his name, focused on educational opportunities for underprivileged students interested in technology, something I knew would have delighted him. And I revised the inheritance plan for Andrew, maintaining the core principle that he should demonstrate financial responsibility, but creating clearer milestones and greater transparency. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, we received word that Natalie had moved to California and become engaged to the elderly founder of a successful chain of car dealerships. Andrew received the news with a wry smile and a shake of his head. Some people never learn, he said, but I certainly did. And for that, I'm almost grateful to her. On the second anniversary of Robert's death, Andrew and I visited his grave together, placing fresh flowers against the simple granite headstone. As we stood there in the gentle spring sunshine, Andrew put his arm around my shoulders. Dad was right about everything, he said quietly. About making my own way, about the satisfaction of earning success. And he was right about you, too. He always said you were the wisest person he knew. I don't know about that, I replied. I just tried to honor what he wanted for you, even when it was difficult. When you stayed silent about the inheritance after my wedding, it felt like you didn't trust me, Andrew admitted. But now I understand it was the greatest act of love. You let me make my own mistakes, discover the truth for myself, even though it must have been excruciating to watch. That's what parenthood is, darling. Knowing when to intervene and when to step back. Your father taught me that. As we walked back to our cars, Andrew asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd told me about the money from the beginning?" Sometimes I acknowledged. But I think Robert was right. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the wisdom to recognize what really matters. And that's a lesson that can't be inherited, only learned through experience. Andrew nodded thoughtfully. Well, I certainly learned it the hard way. But at least the tuition for that particular life lesson didn't cost us $52 million. We both laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful cemetery where Robert rested. I felt his presence, then his approval of the difficult path we'd navigated together, in the stronger relationship that had emerged from the crisis. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give those we love is the space to find their own way, even when we can see the pitfalls ahead. And sometimes, the wisest choice is silence, allowing truth to reveal itself in its own time. My silence about our family wealth had saved Andrew from a lifetime of manipulation and deceit. For that, I would always be grateful for the strength to keep my own counsel when it mattered most. Have you ever had to hold back information to protect someone you love? It's one of the hardest things to do as a parent or friend, watching someone make mistakes when you can see the danger ahead. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family inheritance and the complicated dynamics of love and money. Share in the comments if you face similar situations with gold diggers or financial manipulation in relationships. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the greatest wealth is the wisdom to know when to speak and when to stay silent.